Good afternoon. On behalf of the McCourt School of Public Policy and our Institute of Politics and Public Service and the School for Foreign Service, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Future of Diplomacy Symposium. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton, who is with us here today. We look forward to hearing her keynote conversation in Gaston Hall later this afternoon. This is just my first week as Dean of McCourt. I have been promised that we will have distinguished visitors like this every week, so I'm looking forward to it. I am thrilled to join this wonderful crowd of students and academic leaders, diplomats, foreign service professionals, and alumni. We are at a critically important juncture in our foreign policy. The world and the dynamics of our diplomacy are changing, and the United States' global leadership is more essential now than at any time in the last generation. In this context, we have much to discuss. And since its founding in the fall of 2015, the Institute of Politics and Public Service has established itself as a central player in bringing together these conversations on the hilltop, conversations across party lines and branches of government that bring together key leaders to share their insights on the critical issues of the day. Part of our mission at McCourt is to facilitate cross-campus collaboration, whether cross-disciplinary research or convenings like this. And I want to thank especially Dean Joel Hellman and the School for Foreign Service for their partnership and vision in creating today's symposium, and for including it as part of their Lloyd George Centennial Lecture Series. In just a moment, we will hear from experienced diplomats and foreign service experts about the essential roles that they play in service to state and country. Later, we will discuss what role values play in U.S. foreign policy and consider questions like what are our values and how can and should we stand for them in today's world. Following the second panel, Secretary Clinton will give her perspective on American leadership in foreign affairs in conversation with Ambassador Bill Burns. So, without more ado, thank you again for coming today. I am so proud to be part of Georgetown with an unmatched convening power that will help to shape the future of our diplomacy and our democracy. I'd now like to introduce Zina Sembeta, a student in the Masters of Foreign Service program, who will introduce our panelists and our moderator.
Good afternoon. My name is Zina Sembeta, and I am a graduate student in the Master of Science in Foreign Service program, concentrating in global politics and security. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our first conversation about the future of diplomacy. As a student research assistant at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy and a Rangel Fellow who will be entering the U.S. Foreign Service in September, I am constantly thinking about the future of diplomacy. I am grateful for the opportunity to be here for a conversation amongst such prominent foreign service professionals to discuss this important topic. It is a great honor and pleasure to introduce the distinguished panel members. Ambassador Barbara Bodine is a former ambassador to the Republic of Yemen. Her career of over 30 years in the Foreign Service was spent primarily on Arabian Peninsula and Greater Persian Gulf issues. Ambassador Bodine currently serves as the director of Georgetown's Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. Ambassador John Negroponte has been ambassador to Honduras, Mexico, the Philippines, the United Nations, and Iraq. His most recent position in government was as Deputy Secretary of State, where he served as the State Department's Chief Operating Officer. He currently serves as Vice Chairman of McClarty Associates. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. She was ambassador to Liberia and is currently a distinguished resident fellow in African Affairs at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. Azra Zaya served as Charge d'Affaires and Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. Prior to that role, she was Acting Assistant Secretary and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. She is currently CEO and president of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Ms. Zaya is a graduate of Georgetown School of Foreign Service and is a senior non-resident fellow at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. The panel will be moderated by Bernadette Mihan, who served as Special Assistant to President Barack Obama and National Security Council spokesperson, as well as Special Assistant to the Secretary of State. She is now continuing her work with President Obama as Chief International Officer of the Obama Foundation. Ms. Mihan is on the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy Board of Advisors. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you all to engage with this event on social media using the hashtag #FutureOfDiplomacy to amplify this important discussion. Thank you all for taking the time to share your experiences and thoughts. And without further ado, I give you our panel.
Thank you, Zina, for that wonderful introduction, and congratulations on heading to the Foreign Service. I think you have a rich and wonderful career ahead of you. We are all incredibly excited to be here. We are grateful to Georgetown for hosting us for this incredibly relevant and timely series of conversations today. It is wonderful to see so many friends, old colleagues, familiar faces in the audience. It makes it a little bit more daunting, actually. It's like performing in front of all of your peers. It's a bit of a new experience. I, in particular, wanted to call out Ambassador Jeff De Laurentiis, and I don't know where in the audience he is, right back here. Jeff is a current Centennial Fellow here at Georgetown. He was also most recently the Chargé d'Affaires at our embassy in Cuba and was one of my first mentors in the Foreign Service. When I was a first tour officer in Bogota, Colombia, Jeff was a senior officer, the political counselor, and has mentored me throughout my career, and I am thrilled that we are both back in some capacity at Georgetown. So just wanted to say a special hello to you. And for students here that are interested in foreign policy, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you is seek out Jeff and find time to speak with him while he is on campus. He will give you wonderful guidance and perspective on careers that you're about to embark in. So it's a wonderful opportunity. Of course, I would also like to say thank you so much to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for joining us here today. When people find out that I worked directly for the Secretary for a number of years, they often approach me in a somewhat low whisper and they say, "But what is Hillary Clinton really like?" And I sort of nod. And while there's a wonderful list of things that I could say about Secretary Clinton, I think the most relevant to the conversation today is that when she was the leader of the Department of State, and I think anyone who worked under her tutelage there would agree, she was a true champion of the career officers at the State Department, Foreign Service officers, civil service officers. And she routinely relied on the expertise, the experience, and the knowledge that our diplomats have to offer. And I would like to follow that simply by saying, because there are so many members of her team who are not career officers but are here in the audience, that this was a spirit that I feel was really carried through by all members of her team. And the reason I think it's relevant and important to mention that is the State Department, and when we talk about the role of the essential diplomat, is really at its most effective when we are taking advantage of the knowledge and the expertise of the career experts who have made this their career. So we are incredibly grateful to you, to members of your team who are here, for carrying that spirit through and remaining champions of the essential role of diplomats, current and future. So thank you very much, Madam Secretary. So I am honored to be among some of the giants of the Foreign Service up here on the stage. What is the essential diplomat, you might be asking, and what are we actually going to be speaking to you about? So before we launch into the conversation, I thought I would provide a little context of what we discussed and how we approached this topic today. When we look at the world as it is, we see an increasingly complicated place. Power is becoming more diffuse. There are more actors on the international stage. Information is faster, more voluminous, and less trustworthy than times in the past. The forces of disorder and disruption are growing. And diplomacy is no longer conducted simply between governments, so it's a whole new landscape. But we also see more opportunities than ever before to advance the interests of our nation and the world. From discovering breakthroughs in global health, sustainable energy resources, to providing greater access to education and economic opportunity. Today, we will discuss how we see our nation engaging with the world. Are we prepared to meet these challenges and opportunities? Is the State Department well positioned to lead negotiations and discussions about how to confront these issues? How can we ensure that our diplomats are well-trained, nimble, and remain essential to this process? So that's what we're going to get down to business and discuss. I'd like to start with Barbara, who, as you heard, is the director of the Institute for Diplomacy here at Georgetown. And as mentioned, I spent a year here and now serve on the board of advisors and feel very honored to do so. Embedding as a practitioner, for me, was a great way to reflect on my experiences as a Foreign Service officer, but also importantly to brush off some of the cynicism that collects from years in government service at times, and sometimes rote way of thinking when you're sort of in a career for a long amount of time and you don't have an opportunity to sort of break out and think creatively. So I'm hoping, Barbara, that you might be able to tell us about the mission of ISD, how ISD works to prepare this next generation of diplomats and other foreign service professionals in other institutions like the military for the challenges and opportunities, and in particular for the students in the audience, how should they be engaging with ISD and taking advantage of it during their time here?
Thank you, my thanks to the McCourt School and the School of Foreign Service for putting this series of events on. And great deal of thanks to Secretary Clinton for all of your leadership over so many decades. ISD was actually established 40 years ago. I think it may be the oldest institute within the School of Foreign Service. And it was designed to bring together the academic richness of the university and the considerable experience of practitioners here in Washington to get those two worlds together in a way that improved their ability to do their respective work. It was designed to be a bridge between these two cultures, which sometimes seem to be very, very far apart, and very much of an active two-way traffic across that bridge. Our focus is on the conduct of diplomacy, as the implementer of foreign policy, as if you want the ground game of international relations and international theory. And the way we do that is we have the pleasure and honor of welcoming people like you and Linda, Azra, and there's a large crowd of ISDers out there. Thank you all. The senior practitioners who come for a year, sometimes 2 years, and what they do through their teaching and their mentoring of Georgetown students is help prepare them for what does it really mean to be a diplomat, to be a practitioner. We have certificates in diplomatic studies that we've started. I want to do a shout out to Zina, who is not just a Wrangell Fellow and going into the Foreign Service, but one of our certificate students. We also do student research fellows and some capstone courses. So we're very focused on the statecraft side of it, not tradecraft, but more the statecraft side. And that means working on the intellectual skills, and to a certain extent, the personal skills that you need to be effective to formulate and implement policy, both here in Washington and abroad. A large part of that focus is the ability to think creatively, the ability to think innovatively and still be pragmatic, to be able to look for possible solutions to what seem to be the intractable problems. If it was a tractable problem, someone else would have already solved it. And to understand, to my way of thinking, to understand more the questions you need to be asking, as opposed to trying to get from your professor what the answer is. It's the questions that will allow you to dig deeply into the new issues that you're confronted with, the new technologies you have to deal with, the new parts of the world that you could end up in. And whether that's doing grand strategy or if it's just the day-to-day decisions that we deal with. If you know the questions to ask, you're going to work more comfortably in the complexity and the ambiguity and the white spaces that is diplomacy in so much of our world today. We have to recognize, I think, very importantly, that we are at the preparation end of what will be a very long arc of a career, maybe even multiple careers. And we can't train to current events. We can't train to current issues. We need to educate to a mindset, an intellectual skill set, to be able to go off and deal with issues and problems that we don't even know the names of. A couple of weeks ago, I had lunch with some former students of mine from 10 years past, and they are in careers that even didn't exist when they were in school. They're using technology that didn't exist 10 years ago. So we need to think long-term, not immediate. We also need to recognize that the shift of careers are going to change. I mean, just the list of ambassadorships for Ambassador Negroponte, shows you how much you're going to get bounced around the world. I started life working on Chinese domestic politics and ended up working on the Arabian Peninsula, which I couldn't have found on a map in school. I learned. So it's this ability to think long-term, to analyze with good research skills, the ability to write long form as well as short form, the ability to write for effective, if you didn't get it, I think writing skills are important, for a whole variety of audiences. You have different audiences at different times. And then the ability to express your arguments effectively and cogently. Technology's changed the way we communicate, but it hasn't changed the essence of the need to communicate. And I personally don't think it has changed the need for the face-to-face diplomacy. In fact, it may have actually made it more important. Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of disinformation out there. And the diplomat's job is to know the ground truth and be able to convey it both to the host government or whatever other players, and then also back to Washington. So we need well-grounded, agile diplomats and foreign policy people. I want to also make the point that ISD works within this academic community. And we are a complement to our academic scholarly colleagues. We're not a replacement for them, but we take that theory and we help the student translate it down to some reality. So we're busy. I do encourage any student here to please seek us out to talk about these issues. We have 15 people. We have military officers, State Department officers, and part of our job is to deal with you. So thank you for the opportunity for the small public service announcement.
Great, thank you, Barbara. And I can echo that it really is an amazing institution, and you have a wealth of individuals and experts. So for students, it really is something to take advantage of while you're here.
Would the ISDers just raise your hands, and former ISDers, since Steve Mull is here? Thank you, yay.
So continue on in the conversation. I think before we turn to sort of real-world application of why is the role of a diplomat essential, or the question of is the role of a diplomat still essential, I'd like to focus a little bit on who are the diplomats, who are we that make up the diplomatic corps when we talk about sort of foreign service and civil service and some of these terms. Linda, you served as Director General of the Foreign Service, Director of Human Resources. You oversaw an entire bureau. You served in as an ambassador, so oversaw sort of the work in the field. To me, the case is clear, right? We literally represent the face of America, and America is becoming more and more diverse. Half of the children under the age of 5 in this country represent minority groups. Women and minorities are increasingly the percentage of college and postgraduate degrees in this country. So the case is clear and the talent is there. My question for you is the State Department approaching issues of diversity and inclusivity in the right way? How do we better prepare the Foreign Service to reflect the country? And why is it important at all?
Wow. Well, let me just start by saying it's important.
Yes.
And I have to say, having served in the Foreign Service for 36 years. I saw how important it was as I traveled across the globe. It's the richest element of American culture, our diversity. And while we're not a homogenous society, we're unified in our understanding and our belief, most people, that diversity and inclusion is important for our foreign policy. And I truly believe that the Foreign Service must represent the best face of America, wherever we are in the world. So are we approaching diversity in the right way at the State Department? I think we are. I think we have made really extraordinary efforts, and I was part of those efforts as Director General and certainly throughout my career. We have amazing recruitment programs. We go all over the United States to recruit for diversity. We're at historical Black colleges and universities. We're at traditional Latino and Hispanic universities. We go to the far reaches of the country to recruit the best and brightest and the most reflective face of America. We have not been totally successful. And part of the reason we've not been totally successful is that we start too late in the recruitment process. I always felt when I was Director General that we needed to start recruiting in 8th grade. Because young people, once they go into high school, they start thinking about what they want to do and what they want to be. And by the time they are in college, most of them, or at least as parents, we hope they've decided. So when we start recruiting at college level, we've already lost most of the people. They've already decided that they're going to be lawyers or doctors or teachers or whatever. And many of them have not seen the Foreign Service as a career choice. So we need to plant that seed early. And when we plant that seed early, we need to nurture it. So we need to encourage our Foreign Service people when they go home to go and speak at high schools. I always speak at high schools. I still speak at high schools. And when I was Director General, I spoke at high schools. And I have even met one young person that I spoke to in high school who's in the Foreign Service now.
Great.
So you only have to get one. And and then secondly, we do have amazingly successful diversity recruitment program. Zeynep is representative of the Rango program, and we have the Pickering Fellowship, and we have recruited extraordinarily talented and smart young African Americans, Latinos, women, people who come from diverse backgrounds into the Foreign Service. So at that part, we're doing okay. I'm not saying we're perfect, we're doing okay. Where I think we're failing, because diversity is not just recruitment,
It's retention.
it's retention.
Yes.
And we need to do a better job of retaining the people that we are bringing into the Foreign Service. When young people like Zeynep look at the top of the Foreign Service, she wants to be able to see people who look like her. She wants mentors who not only look like her, but mentors who do not look like her. Reflection of that diversity. So we have to do a better job of retaining and finding out why people who leave.
Do you think there's been a recognition already that retention is part of the problem, and has there been a shift to address that? Or do you think we're sort of still at the point where we need people to acknowledge that is part of the problem?
I think we have acknowledged it as a problem, and there are people who are trying to address it, but it cannot be a one-off. So we'll have a program that talks about mentoring, or a program that discusses retention, and then we leave it. It has to be constant. It has to be in the psyche of every single person in the State Department. It can't be just the Director General. It can't be just senior officers. It has to be everybody in the department. And it has to be part of a vision that our leadership has, that we push down at every level so that people do understand that diversity is important, it's a strength, it's a value, and it's important as a reflection of our foreign policy.
Thank you. I think certainly the tie to an institution like ISD within Georgetown, if we could replicate that and have that sort of model in other schools and high schools and other institutions, certainly bringing awareness to what the Foreign Service is and encouraging people to become a part of it.
Just one final point. When you ask why diversity is important, we need to have diverse people in the room when we're doing negotiations. So if we're negotiating in Afghanistan with the Taliban, we ought to have women in the room to bring up the issues that are relevant to women. In South Sudan, where rape is being used as a tool of war, is rape on the table as an issue to be discussed when we're negotiating? So we need to have a variety of people at the table who will bring different ideas to the discussion so that we can get to a point where we're successful in our negotiations. And that's why diversity is important.
That's great. That's a wonderful answer, and the passion comes through, and I think it was fantastic. Thank you. I'd like to segue now sort of with the background of a little bit of education and tools and training that we feel is necessary, who we are as a diplomatic corps, to sort of a real-world application. I'm going to turn to a very storied gentleman in Foreign Service lore, former Deputy Secretary of State, Ambassador Negroponte. You heard his resume. I can't even run through all of the titles and the jobs that you've had, so we're thrilled to have you with us. And I thought we could talk about this in the context of China, which is arguably, well, certainly one of the most important relationships that we have bilaterally, and arguably one of the more complex relationships. I will put in another Georgetown plug, as I've been trying to do all along, but this one has a personal twist. My husband, Evan Medeiros, who is a Georgetown professor, teaches on Chinese foreign policy, so if you're interested, students, you can sign up for his class. And with that, I will turn back to the topic at hand. In the past, I think the U.S. has tried to find a balance between cooperation and competition with China. We've cooperated and had success on issues like climate change and nonproliferation. We seem to be continually in a competitive mode on issues like trade, military presence in East Asia, maritime issues, Taiwan, all of these questions. Certainly, I think we are increasingly moving towards more of a competitive relationship of late. My question to you is, given sort of the unique, comprehensive complexity of the relationship with China, do you feel that the State Department and the diplomatic corps is prepared to meet the challenge of engaging with them? Do we have the depth of understanding, not just of the Chinese language, which I think a lot of times people use as the marker of whether a diplomat is trained? Well, he speaks Chinese. Well, okay, what does that really mean? Do we understand sort of the ideology, their historical lens for viewing the world? Do we have the ability or the inclination to not combat, but deal with their increasing presence in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and leverage it where it might be appropriate? How do you view how we have sort of historically as an institution prepared diplomats for these challenges?
Okay.
That's a lot.
Thank you for the modest question.
Yeah.
But before I try to answer it, let me just thank Georgetown, the Institute for Study of Diplomacy, the School of Foreign Service, for pulling this meeting together and for inviting Secretary Clinton to play such an important role in our get-together. I have a lot of connections with Georgetown. I taught a course on science, technology, and foreign policy when I was, it was a workshop at the School of Foreign Service when I was Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs back in the 1980s. I have a daughter who graduated from Georgetown, and my wife has got a PhD from the history department. So we're kind of Georgetown everywhere. I also want to say that both the Wrangell and Pickering Fellows have been absolutely outstanding. In the decade I've been out of government, I've had the chance to teach for about 9 years, 7 of them at Yale, 2 at George Washington University, and I've always had, as it turned out, either a Wrangell or a Pickering Fellow as my teaching assistant, and they went on to Foreign Service, and some of them have already had 2 or 3 tours. And they love it, and they've just been absolutely outstanding. So, Linda, I think that's a program that we just have to encourage to keep on going. Now, China. I had a little bit the reverse experience of Barbara. I asked to go to sub-Sahara Africa as my first assignment in the Foreign Service because I spoke French. I spoke quite fluent French in those days. And when they had the day where they announced our assignments, I was told I was going to Hong Kong, which I thought was a little incongruous, but I did it. And the Foreign Service always has its way of trying to prove its point to you that you're available for worldwide service. And I personally think that's a very good principle. And I think we should think carefully when we make exceptions to that rule. But China was a totally different place in those days. There was the bamboo curtain. It was hard to figure out what was going on out there. Movement back and forth between even Hong Kong and China was very limited. We had no good intelligence. We couldn't even figure out whether there was a famine going on in China at the time because, in subsequent years, we would have flown a satellite around and witnessed crop failures and so forth. So our main sources of intelligence were refugee interviews, and we had a big, the basement of the British American Tobacco Building where we imported all the Chinese newspapers from the mainland that we could get our hands on, and we had people translating these papers for whatever tidbits we could pick up about the People's Republic of China. Well, how times have changed. I think the question you have asked, both the importance of China and how well equipped we are to deal with it, is probably one of the biggest issues facing our diplomacy today. It is, I don't fear any contradiction on this, the most important single bilateral relationship that we have, and it needs to be handled with great care and handled by people who have some good sense of what that country is like and all about. You asked me how well we're doing in that area. Frankly, I'm impressed. When I went out to Hong Kong and, there were people in Taiwan and so forth, and then we had relations, we opened relations with China. We had people at the embassy who spoke pretty good Chinese. I went as deputy secretary to the embassy in Beijing and met with all, one of these meetings with all the junior officers there, the first tour officers. I asked how many of you speak Chinese? They all raised their hands. They absolutely all of them. And a lot of them start learning Chinese even before going to college, as many of you know. And when I taught at Yale, I think 10% of the entering freshmen would take Chinese as their to meet their foreign language requirement. I don't know if that's still true, but studying a language is more than just studying a language. I mean, anybody who's studied a foreign language knows you learn a lot about the culture. You learn how people talk about food. You learn about how they talk about different kinds of ideas. And so I would say language and area studies remains one of the real coins of the realm as far as being an effective Foreign Service officer. I don't think that that's changed so much. And we're always appreciative, wherever you go around the world, of those officers who've taken the trouble to learn the language, learn the culture, know about the area, and they can actually go out and make more friends for the United States. I was told the entering classes of the Foreign Service, if you set a modest goal for yourself, meet one new person from the country you're assigned to a day. Just try and do that. And by the end of the year, you'll have met 200-300 people and made some friends for the United States. And the ambassador's course, I used to tell them, go visit the people that you want to see. Don't call them all behind the big walls that you live behind. And go visit the bank heads and the people that run the NGOs and everything. And people 30 years later will be telling their grandchildren, and the American ambassador came to see me and I told him or her this, that, and the other thing. So yeah, I think we're pretty well equipped. I think our problems with China are more on the policy front. I think we have, without being too discursive here, I think we've got the issue of dealing mentally and politically with the fact that China has become such a powerful and dynamic country, and there's no turning that back. And if somebody has the idea that, an effective policy is going to be to start taking measures to prevent them from advancing economically, that's foolish. But it seems to me if you're saying the playing field should be equal, and we should insist that they play by certain rules. But if you play by the rules, then as long as you're willing to compete fair and square, then we've got to adapt ourselves to living with that situation. And lastly, I would say, if we can bring ourselves to some kind of adequate modus vivendi with China, I think the opportunities for collaboration with China are very large indeed, and I think there are global issues on which if we don't collaborate with a country like China, we will be at odds and the world will not be able to decide what to do, whereas if we work with them, that makes the two largest economies of the world helping move that issue forward, and a much greater chance of other countries falling in line or coming along with us.
I'm heartened by your response because it sounds like you have a positive outlook. You feel like the State Department's well positioned, Foreign Service officers are sort of engaging and going out into the field prepared.
We have no choice. It seems to, I mean, unless you want to turn this over to the Pentagon or something.
No,
okay, right.
No. With all due respect.
Well, I'd rather not either.
I'd like to turn now, Azra. You, as mentioned in your bio, served as our chargé d'affaires in France. You've also had a wealth of other experience, and I'd like to explore sort of the theme of, as around the world, but in Europe it seems at the forefront now, people becoming a little bit disenchanted with the benefits, or the so-called benefits of globalization, as some would say, a rise in populism, a rise in nationalism. There seems to be a trend of governments making foreign policy decisions based perhaps more than at certain points in the recent future on domestic political considerations. The UK and the EU are grappling with Brexit. Other countries in Europe, including France, are dealing with issues of migration and integration. We see a turning inward. There are also, and I think historically the Foreign Service has dealt with sort of these allegations that diplomats sit in an ivory tower and we're disconnected from what the people really think, and isn't it nice to drink champagne and go to parties?
What
post is that? My question for you is, how can Americans, diplomats, approach and solve global problems like migration that are so deeply linked to local domestic politics and public sentiment, and at a time when governments sometimes really do seem deeply disconnected from what the public is thinking and feeling? How can our diplomats more effectively engage with the public and be more connected to the reality of the feeling on the ground?
Okay, well, I'm going to give the solution to the migration crisis in 60 seconds.
Great.
Now, first, I just have to say what an honor it is to be present in a room of so many of my idols in the field of diplomacy. So I'm wondering how I ended up here. Maybe it was a random drawing, the letter Z, but I'm honored to have the chance to share my views. I think on an issue like migration, this really is a case where we need to be able to play that three-dimensional chess game and not try to reduce it down to a straight line security solution. Mm-hmm. All of the measures I would propose in three, or what I would put forward, are within the frame simply that the US cannot go it alone. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, you have to take on the root causes. Mm-hmm. And the driving force behind forced displacement, which has hit record levels, 68.5 million innocent people forcibly displaced in 2017. The driving force is violent conflict. It's interesting, if you look at the trend lines, 10 years ago, 80% of humanitarian assistance was going to victims of natural disasters. Now that proportion is flipped, 80% of humanitarian assistance worldwide going to victims of violent conflict. And to look at the drivers, you have to tackle issues like governance, like rule of law, like accountability. And that brings me to my second point. Obviously, as diplomats, government-to-government engagement is paramount. It's the essence of what we do, but we have to go beyond the corridors of power to engage civil society. And by engaging, that means listening, that means empowering, and that means supporting local actors and local solutions on the ground. I can say that any one of the leaders in this room has been a part of that. Mike Posner in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, we were proud to pioneer a series of programs to bring together local actors in Syria to reconcile sectarian divides, to work in Central America towards NGO accountability of past atrocities and violations of human rights that create justice and a space for citizens to exercise their rights and live peacefully. And finally, I have to give credit to Secretary Clinton. And I have to say, on every visit of yours that I supported, you made time to meet with underrepresented civil society actors. I saw you do it in Iraq when you convened a group of Iraqi women, victims, no, survivors of conflict, and important actors in the political process, and you gave them the chance to explain to the Secretary of State how they see things. So I think this can really occur at all levels. The final point I would make on civil society engagement, I think it's important that we get out of the lens of seeing civil society as a recipient of largesse, and we recognize it as an equal partner with government. Just one figure I would throw at you all, 2015, the last year documented, private US foundations donated $380 million towards peace and security worldwide. So again, there are many actors in this space who share US government interests and values, and I think who are ready to partner if we take the time to engage. The final point I would make with respect to migration is I think there's an imperative for the United States to re-engage and lead multilaterally. When you look at the decision to withdraw from the Global Compact on Migration, for which the US was an ideological driver, you have 164 countries who have committed to an outcome which the US did not shape in its final result. And with that, as we continually ask countries to do more, let's not forget 85% of refugees are in developing countries. We cannot roll up our own welcome mat. We have to meet our own treaty obligations and really live up to what I found to be in my own career the most compelling case for America is our story that we are a nation of immigrants. If we don't live up to that in our policies, I think the ultimate result is diminished American influence.
Picking up on that thread, and very briefly before we open it up to student questions, you mentioned civil society, and sort of in the intro remarks we talked about how diplomacy, if it ever was, is certainly no longer just the purview of governments to governments. I'd be interested briefly in hearing from any and all of you, before we open it up to the students, what are sort of non-governmental alliances that the State Department should be looking at? What is sort of the future of public-private partnerships, working with foundations, civil society groups, businesses? When you have companies like Google and Facebook and Apple weighing in on privacy debates in Europe, when you have the Washington Post sort of taking a leading role in lecturing us on what our human rights values should be in the relationship with Saudi Arabia, when we look at all of these outside actors, how do we engage with them and bring them in so the State Department is ahead of the curve and not sort of ceding the space to outside sort of influencers? And I'd welcome anyone's thoughts on that one. It's a lot, I know.
Okay. First of all, I don't think that diplomacy has ever been well, let me back that up. Any diplomat who spent all of his or her time only dealing in the ministries wasn't doing their job. And whether or not we had big walls or not, your job was to get out of the embassy and out of the ministries. And for those of you in Washington, if you know the effective embassies here in town, they are the ones that are getting out of just the State Department and the Department of Defense. So our job has always been working with the business community, working with academics, working with civil society. So it's become more diffuse, and we have to work at it harder. But that's always been part of a good diplomat, and I think this idea of make a new friend every day, not just in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One new area that actually the Institute is looking at, a new player on the scene, is we always thought the nation state was going to be subsumed by either multilateral corporations, the Googles of the world, or the supranational, the UN, the EU, these types of organizations, and they are definitely power players that we have to deal with. A new actor emerging are cities and states. And if you think about, California very nicely said, well, you may want to get out of the Paris Peace Accords, but we're still in it. And given the size and power of the California economy, that's important. There are major cities that are involved in migration issues, involved in technology issues. And so they're just starting to define for themselves what their role is going to be and how can they play. And the State Department needs to sort of start thinking about that too. But I do firmly believe that the nation state, and therefore the diplomat, is still going to be the core. Because at the end of the day, Google can have an agreement with the EU, but if you're going to have a treaty, it still has to be a nation state. If you're going to have migration, if you're going to have climate change. So we need to understand that these are, to borrow a military term, force multipliers, not competitors for what we're trying to do. And that's going to go back to this agility issue, this ability to think not even three-dimensional chess, five-dimensional chess. And looking at these, and to be honest, as a diplomat serving overseas, I love my friends in the ministries. I truly enjoy the people outside the ministries.
And I see you nodding, Linda, that you agree, I assume, with all of this. And
I would just add to that it, again, to echo that point, it is so important to get out and meet people beyond governments. And I was just sitting here thinking about the Young African Leaders Initiative, where we have brought over 3,000 Africans from across the continent, from urban areas to rural areas, to the United States, given them leadership training. And I know that 1 to a dozen of those young people on this continent where the median age is 19, that those young people are going to be in leadership roles in the future. And we have to engage them now. We have to nurture them now. We have to treat it almost like we treat mentoring in the Foreign Service. Yeah. We have to mentor them and prepare them for leadership so that they can bring their countries up to the next level. And NGOs can help us with that. We should partner with them to work with youth populations, but we also have to be part of that process so that when these leaders step into leadership positions, they're prepared and they have the best interests of their countries in mind.
Right. Azra, briefly, yes.
If I could just pick up on one of your points, Bernadette, earlier about public disaffection. I saw it firsthand in France and Europe. We see it in the United States. Elsewhere, I think public-private partnerships really broadening the definition of who can partner with the United States on equal footing is part of the solution. I think you see that in the Paris Agreement, where the considerable private sector commitment is right up there with states and cities in terms of being America's presence now in that process. But also, I think that it gives citizens a way to participate and be a part of those solutions as opposed to being cut out and not understanding or appreciating the effort that's being made. One other point I think is we need to recognize the closing space for civil society worldwide as part of a 13, 14-year trend in an overall decline in freedom. It means being resolute also with some of our partners in the need to allow civil society the space to operate and to accept foreign funding.
With that, I think we sort of touched on a variety of topics, and I'd love to open it up to student questions. There's microphones on each side, so we will start right over here. Please, if you could let us know your name, what you're studying, and then ask your question.
Hello, my name is Fatma Al-Fatah. I'm in the Arab Studies program, and I'm pursuing a certificate in global human development. I'm sorry, it's not ISD. I'm from Modesto, California. However, I'm a Yemeni American, and my question is, there's been a lot of discussion about how diplomacy has failed Yemen, and so I'm interested to hear what kind of tools you think are needed to help the state of Yemen right now with the current peace talk or with the current UN-led talks. So yeah.
Sure. I think Barbara probably that
question. Nice to see you. The only way that we're going to solve the Yemen tragedy, and it is a tragedy of grotesque proportions, is through supporting diplomacy. And I think the steps that have been taken, the UN has been doing just an amazing job in bringing the parties together. And the part of the role of the diplomat, and it's quiet, it's not, one of the downsides of diplomacy is that we're not a very visible profession, and when we are the most effective, we are the least visible. But having diplomats who are working aggressively, assiduously, with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, through the Omanis, with the Kuwaitis, the Jordanians, and then certainly the EU and other parties, to really push the parties, to this step-by-step process that Griffith has launched. I'm not sure I would say that diplomacy has failed. I would prefer to think that diplomacy just has not yet succeeded. Because the other side of that is that there isn't a military solution. And, the diplomat is there before the military shows up, and the diplomat is there after the military leaves. And we're often there on the ground quietly in between. This is also a case to kind of go back to some of our other partners on how we further our interests, is by supporting NGOs and civil society in Yemen. Both financially and politically, we have been able to blunt some of what is going on there by making sure that food is there. We're working with Congress on trying to roll back or to more clearly define and examine our role in supporting some of this. So the diplomats are there very quietly across the board. This is a UN-led effort at this point, and it should be, but it also is taking diplomats of Arab states, European states, and the United States to push it forward. We'll get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go over to this side, please.
Hi. Thank you so much for today. And my name is Tipa. I'm a graduate student from Center of Latin American Studies, and I'm from Thailand. And my question is about public diplomacy. So I would like to hear from you, what do you think the role or the impact of public diplomacy we can use in both countries that have kind of misperception or misunderstanding to us, and also in the country that do not know us enough? Thank you.
Public diplomacy?
Well, would anyone else like to take it? I'd
Bernadette, I
happy
feel
to.
like you're...
So I was a public diplomacy officer. It's a great question. I have often felt that in recent years, I think people are elevating the role of public diplomacy. I think historically at state, it was sort of the political officers and the econ officers. Those were like the sexy jobs, and you were out to the ministry and doing demarches, and it was like, oh, public diplomacy, what is that all about? You're just kind of like talking to people. I think it's one of the most important jobs that we have at the State Department. I think when we're talking about the role of the essential diplomat, all of these points that John and others have made about getting out into the public, meeting people, explaining what we are all about, to Linda's point of just the representation of who our diplomats are alone is part of public diplomacy. I think that it requires getting out into the field. I think we need to do a better job of explaining our policies, explaining how they're relevant to the lives of everyday people that we meet, and not just directed at messaging towards governments. Because in my experience, the success or failure of a policy is not just dictated by how good the policy is, but it's how well you can market and sell the idea and gain the support of the constituencies that you're appealing to. And I think historically we have not done a great job of that. We focus on the governments and not sort of getting popular support. And this was part of the question that Azra was addressing. We sometimes seem so disconnected from what the public is actually thinking and feeling that I think we get in our own way a little bit. So I don't know if that fully answered the question. And I'm happy for others to weigh in also, but.
Just one sentence.
Yeah.
If you can't explain a policy, it's probably not a good policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So, please.
Thank you, panelists, for your comments this afternoon. My name is Rebecca Martin. I'm a graduate student in the German and European Studies program here at SFS, and I want to take advantage of having so many distinguished women on stage to ask a question about women in diplomacy. I apologize. Your thoughts are But my question is, as a female diplomat, what are challenges or obstacles you felt you faced that were unique to you being a female in the role as a U.S. diplomat, either professionally or personally? And what are some strategies or solutions you developed to overcome that this next generation of leaders and diplomats can learn from? Thank you.
How much time do we have?
Please.
I'll start. Oh, you want to go? No, go.
So damn polite.
I think everyone just has to speak from their own experience. I worked as a political reporting officer largely in the Middle East, and you would think with your stereotypes that as a woman of color, I would have been at a disadvantage in that role. I would say quite the contrary. In my own case, personally, I had access to all sides of society. The very male, but not entirely male-dominated power structures in countries where I worked, Oman, Syria, Egypt, welcomed me as an official representative of the US and didn't question my credibility based on my gender. But I also had access to the women of all these countries, which I think gave me that 360 perspective that Barbara and Ambassador Negroponte have elaborated on so well.
I'm going to jump in because I want to elaborate on that point, and then we can move to another. Because I also served primarily in the Middle East. Started in Asia, but primarily in the Middle East, and served in Baghdad twice, Kuwait, and Yemen. And I agree entirely with Uzra that I did not find it a disadvantage, and in fact, in many ways, I found it an advantage. My access in the government and all, the non-governmental sectors that we talked about, it was not a problem. And then I also had the 360. So I think one thing, and I would actually say this to anybody going into diplomacy, if you want to be taken seriously, do your job seriously. Know your stuff. And if you are credible and you're serious and you are doing your job, what your gender is or what your color is or what your background is disappears. They're interested in, do you know your stuff? And that's the most important thing.
And I always felt that I was the representative of the U.S. government, and I think that's what people saw when I walked into the room. And occasionally you would have a person who might look down on you or may question your abilities because you're a woman, or in some cases because I was an African American. I never owned that. I made sure that I owned who I was, and I owned my presence. And my presence was the representative of the US government. So I didn't really feel that I was disadvantaged overseas as a woman. I probably felt more disadvantages inside the State Department.
Right. And
I will.
on that point,
please.
I would echo Linda's comment. I think you can learn from negative experiences, though, in terms of the kind of mentor you want to be. I first experienced that difference internally from the State Department when I chose to have a baby.
This is what I was going to
And the 6 weeks that I took off was questioned by my supervisor as excessive. And I learned from that experience that I would model my own leadership very differently. And I think everyone as leaders, we really have an imperative to give that next generation the support they need. And it is not easy, single or married, taking a family through the foreign service nomadic life of moving every 2 to 3 years. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I approach the question in the same way, where for me it was sort of, I'm a new mother. I have a 9-month-old at home, and I'm no longer in the foreign service, but I think it's an issue that women grapple with everywhere. And so when I heard the question, it was sort of less of how did others approach me, and it was how does my own institution handle me being a woman who, when I entered, I was single. I had aspirations of meeting a partner and having a family life. That's tough enough in the foreign service. And then you meet someone, and that person has a career and dreams and goals of his or her own, and then you bring a baby into it. And as a woman, it's difficult. You feel like you're faced with choices that perhaps your male counterparts don't have to make. And it's the question of, I think I will be so bold as to say, broader than the State Department, and just how in the U.S. We approach the importance of family and the role of women in the workplace and how we can be more supportive, not just in the diversity of our talent, but in recognizing that families and working women are part of that diversity, and we need to be much more supportive as a society if we want to succeed.
Yeah,
So.
I want to put some, yeah, I agree. I want to put some context on this, is that having come into the Foreign Service, you know, practically with Thomas Jefferson, that the fact that the conversation is, you know, how can I be married and have a child and still have my career, was not even an issue before. It used to be that, first of all, if you got married, you had to quit. That was it. And in some ways, almost more importantly, when I came into the Foreign Service, women were not allowed to have Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Japanese language training, and you couldn't go to basically posts that didn't speak French or Spanish. Those two, that language and that assignments limitations, severely limited your career trajectory. It's a little bit like being in the Army and not knowing how to carry a gun. You had no status. And it was in the 70s that these changes in first language training and assignments around the world, and then also a decision that you could actually be married and keep your job, really changed the whole structure, the whole environment within which women were able to have careers. They simply couldn't have them before. And I think that it's important to note that the State Department is never, you know, we're never finished, but we have made such considerable strides. The fact that you have 4 women on this panel and you're going to have 4 women on the next panel, I had 2 women in my Foreign Service entering class. And by the time I was ambassador in Yemen, again, we weren't supposed to have Arabic, we weren't supposed to go to difficult posts. My embassy, I'm a woman, my deputy, my political officer, my economic officer, my vice consul, my deputy systems manager, and the deputy commander of my Marine security guards were all women. And all but the Marine had Arabic language training. So the world changes.
Yes, I think we'll go to this side.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jonah. I'm a law student. I'm doing international law. I also applied to the Arab Studies School here. And I had a question, something that Ambassador Thomas Greenfield said really stuck out to me about getting to kids and leaders when they're young and making sure that they're motivated to go on this course and pursue the languages and cultures that would make them into an effective diplomat. I kind of thought about my own experience where I went home and I told my parents that I wanted to be a diplomat, and they really didn't know what that meant. If I went home and I told them I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, they would have understood, but I said something similar to my guidance counselor and my school administrators, and they, again, didn't really know what to tell me. So do you think that there's something else that needs to happen besides getting to the kids early, making sure that their parents know that this is not only an achievable dream, but this is an important and increasingly essential need in our society today? Is there something to do additionally besides getting to the kids to get the word to?
This is an issue that we have all been grappling with in the State Department. How do we get our story out to everyday Americans? How do we develop a constituency among people outside the Beltway? And part of that, again, is having people in the Foreign Service. We have a program called Hometown Diplomats, where people go back home and talk about the Foreign Service and talk about what we do to people who wouldn't ordinarily hear that. My family didn't know what I was doing until I became an ambassador. And
Mine still has no clue.
And most people thought when I said I was in the Foreign Service that I was in the military service, and they would ask me what branch of the service. And that still happens today, and it was happening 36 years ago. So we have to do a better job of getting out to communities and talking about the Foreign Service. I spend probably 30% of my time going across the U.S. speaking. And it's not easy because you're going to far-flung places and you're not being paid, and half the time I'm using my own money. But I think it's important to let Americans know that we're out there so that they can thank us for their service as well, for our services as well, because diplomats get killed in the line of duty. Oh, yeah. Diplomats sacrifice so much, and the everyday American does not realize that. They don't realize what we are doing for them. And as I used to hear Wendy Sherman say all the time in her speeches, that people, like we thank our military for their services, we need to thank diplomats for their service. And people don't know to thank us because they don't know who we are.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you for the question.
So I think on that note, it is time for us to wrap. I would like to close just by thanking everybody on the stage for joining us. To all of the students in the audience, 3 of the people on this stage you have access to here on the Georgetown campus, so take advantage of it. I've already filled up Jeff's schedule for the year by suggesting you meet with him. Exactly. Please take advantage and know that if you join the Foreign Service, you are joining an incredible family that is, in fact, essential, that is values-based, and may you all have the good fortune to work for a secretary like Secretary Clinton and her team, because it really has been a privilege for all of us to have done so, and we're very grateful. So thank you so much for joining us.